Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Brandon was never the type to fall in love easily. In fact, he had always been cautious with his feelings. He had experienced a few disappointments and knew how the excitement of the beginning could turn into frustration by the end. But when he met Haley, everything was different. It was as if time had stopped just so he could observe every gesture she made. Her smile, the way she played with her hair when she was nervous, the direct way she spoke her mind without considering others' reactions, it all affected him in a way that surprised him. And the more he got to know her, the more involved he felt. If other stories had made him hesitate, this one made him run. He started slowly. He would send her messages for no reason, just to let her know he was thinking about her. One day, he showed up at her door with a book she mentioned reading in her teens. Another time, he prepared a basket with her favorite foods and brought it to her workplace so she wouldn't have to eat alone. What surprised everyone the most was that he never expected anything in return. He did it because he wanted to. Because deep down, he wanted her to know she was special. Even on days when she seemed distant, he persisted. When she said she was tired of everything, he listened patiently, holding her hand until the silence became comfortable. Haley, at first, thought all of this was over the top. She came from a troubled relationship full of empty promises and disappointments. She didn't want to create expectations. But over time, she realized there was something about Brandon that was different. He didn't need to say all the time that he loved her because his actions shouted it. When she got sick and couldn't get out of bed, he stayed by her side for 3 whole days, even though he had important commitments. He canceled everything. He said she came first. Haley was shocked by that level of dedication. No one had ever placed her at the center of everything like that. The dating request wasn't with flowers or speeches. It was with sincerity. He looked her in the eyes and said, "If you let me stay, I promise to make you feel safe. And if I ever fail, I'll try again and again." She cried. And accepted. From that day on, their lives transformed. They bought a simple house but filled it with plans. They painted the walls together, messing up the colors, laughing at the mess. They built memories as the days passed, and soon came the wedding. It was intimate, only with those who truly mattered. Brandon seemed unable to stop smiling. During the vows, he promised to be by her side even during phases when love wasn't obvious and that he'd fight every day to ensure she never felt alone again. Their first child was born a year later. Brandon was the kind of father who woke up in the middle of the night to warm up the bottle and sing songs quietly, even though he couldn't sing. He held the baby so Haley could rest, even after an exhausting day at work. He didn't divide tasks, he took them on as if every part of the routine was as much his responsibility as hers. 2 years later, their second daughter arrived. And the family felt complete. They took photos, went on picnics, celebrated simple dates with homemade cakes and drawings on the walls. Brandon loved to document everything, as if wanting to preserve each little piece of that happiness. But time, as it always does, began to alter the rhythm of things. Work demanded more, exhaustion weighed heavily, and the two started losing some of the connection that had once been so natural. But Brandon kept trying. He bought tickets to shows she liked, even though he didn't enjoy the bands that much. He prepared dinners when she said the day had been tough. He took the kids out for walks just so she could have some time to herself. And still, despite all these gestures, a void began to grow between them. He felt something was off but thought it was just the accumulation of routine. Until that night. Haley seemed strange, her gaze distant, as if she were somewhere else. Brandon felt a tightness in his chest, as if sensing what was coming. She sat on the couch, held a pillow tightly, took a few deep breaths, and then said it. Just a few words. And they were enough to bring everything crashing down. "I got involved with someone else." She said it was impulsive, that it didn't mean anything, that she felt suffocated. That it shouldn't have happened. But for Brandon, it meant everything. Because it dismantled the story he believed he had built with so much effort, so much love, so much care. He stayed silent. He got up, went to the bedroom, grabbed a pillow and a blanket, came back to the living room, and handed them to her. "You sleep in the guest room." He said it calmly, without shouting, without crying. But inside him, something had broken. From that night on, every gesture that had once been filled with affection turned into distance. And even though she apologized, even though she cried, even though she tried to explain, he could no longer listen with the same heart as before. The betrayal, for him, wasn't just about the act. It was about everything it represented. About how much he believed he was enough. About how much he gave himself, believing he was building something solid. And now, faced with that reality, Brandon could only think of one thing: how can someone destroy so much, even after receiving everything? That night destroyed more than just a promise. Haley curled up on the mattress in the guest room as if that could push away the guilt that was crushing her. She knew Brandon had taken the news like a blunt blow. His lack of reaction was more terrifying than any scream. In his silence, there was a contained cry, a stifled pain, a disappointment spreading through every corner of the house like a crack no one knew how to fix. The next morning, Haley woke up early. She prepared breakfast for the kids and waited for some gesture, any sign that said there was still something to save. Brandon came down the stairs, poured his coffee, and said good morning without looking up. It was the first time she felt invisible in her own home. Later that afternoon, with a heavy heart, she took paper and pen and wrote a letter. She wrote as if pouring out her soul. She told everything: the regret, the shame, the reasons she herself was still trying to understand. She didn't justify the mistake, but she tried to explain how she got there. She folded the letter carefully and left it on his pillow, taking a deep breath before leaving the room. When she returned later, the letter was still there. Untouched. That broke her. She thought about taking it back but decided to leave it. If he wanted to, he would read it. If he ignored it, that would be another answer. The next morning, while tidying up the kids' room, she passed by his bedroom door and saw the letter was gone. The pillow was smooth, as if no one had slept there. She felt her chest tighten. He had read it. Or at least, he had touched it. And that, as small as it was something. That night, she found the letter folded again, but now on the living room table. On top of it, a note with just 2 words: "I read it." That was enough to make Haley cry in the bathroom for almost an hour. Brandon had read it. He knew everything. But still, he chose to keep his distance. In the days that followed, she tried to hold on to whatever she could. She requested a transfer at work, completely distanced herself from the coworker involved, ignored messages, blocked numbers, changed her routine. She wanted to show with actions that she was still worth it. Brandon noticed. But he didn't react. The only thing that changed was that he started coming home later from work, as if trying to stay out of the house as much as possible. Haley then began planning every gesture carefully. She prepared his favorite dishes, left small affectionate notes, organized the house details the way he liked them. But the responses were dry. An okay, a nod, a change of subject. It was like living with someone who had already said goodbye but stayed out of obligation. The most painful part was realizing that he cared for the kids with the same tenderness as always. He smiled with them, played, was present. But when he crossed paths with her, it was like walking through an empty street. The absence of words, touch, eye contact felt like being dead while still alive. And she felt it every second. She suggested couples therapy. He agreed but made it clear, "I'm doing this for the kids." In the first session, Haley opened up. She talked about how she felt before the betrayal, how the routine had swallowed the woman she once was. She spoke about emotional exhaustion, suffocating loneliness, the constant feeling that no one saw her. She said she made a mistake trying to find outside what was hurting inside. The therapist listened. So did Brandon. But at the end of the session, he simply said, "That doesn't change what you did." The sentence fell like a verdict. And even so, she went home with him, sitting in the car as if accepting punishment for something she couldn't fix. The sessions continued. Haley tried to piece things back together, even though it was cutting her fingers. She prepared a special night with old photos of them, music that marked the start of their relationship, a simple cake with his favorite flavor. Brandon came home, looked at the table, and said, "I'm not hungry." He went upstairs and locked the door. She blew out the candles one by one and put away what was left. Then she sat on the couch and stayed there until morning, asking herself if there was still any part of him worth fighting for. And even though she was hurt, her internal answer was still yes. But little by little, her gestures began to be avoided. Hugs bumped into crossed arms. Conversations were limited to the necessary. When she suggested something, he responded with short phrases. When she tried to show affection, he pulled back. The letter that once represented a chance to start over became just another reminder that he had already begun to say goodbye. And now, she was starting to realize that maybe she was fighting alone against something that could only be overcome together. At this point, Haley began living between guilt and attempts. She left the house earlier, came back later, left the kids with their grandparents on some weekends to see if creating space might open a crack between them. But what grew was the silence. And this silence, now, had a name, a story, a weight. And no matter how tightly she held on to everything she still felt, the sensation was that love was trapped in a place where Brandon no longer lived. After months of trying to sustain a relationship that had already crumbled inside, Haley proposed a trip. It was her last attempt. She suggested Hawaii, the place where they spent their honeymoon. She thought that maybe revisiting that scene could reignite something in Brandon. When she told him, she expected rejection, but he simply said they could look at flights. No enthusiasm, no opinion. She understood that he was only going because he felt obligated. She organized everything carefully. She asked Brandon's parents to take care of the kids and planned the trip as a return to the past. She booked the same hotel, chose the same tours, and brought the dress she wore when they first confessed their love. Brandon was polite upon arrival. He picked up the bags, thanked her, and looked at the ocean without emotion. On the way to the hotel, she tried to start conversations, but he responded with short phrases or nods. On the first night, Haley realized, he was only physically present. They repeated the activities from before. They visited the same tourist spots, smiled for others, but between them, there was no connection. Brandon followed the itinerary, participated, but it was as if he were absent. Haley, even so, kept trying. She scheduled a boat ride at sunset. It was the same one from years ago. They sat side by side. She talked about the kids, about how fast they were growing. He responded without emotion. When she leaned her shoulder against his, he stayed still. He didn't pull away, but he didn't react either. Later, she invited him for a walk. They stopped where they once made plans for the future. Haley asked if he believed in fresh starts. He stayed silent for a few seconds, then said that sometimes we try to relive something that no longer exists. She hugged him. He hugged back. And kissed her. But the kiss was different. Without surrender, without urgency. It felt like a goodbye. That night, they slept together. But even in that intimate moment, Haley felt that he avoided looking into her eyes. She realized he pretended involvement while pulling away inside. The next morning, Brandon went for a run. When he returned, Haley waited for him with coffee. They sat together and drank in silence. He didn't mention the night before. He finished, got up, and went to take a shower. The rest of the day passed like a repeated script, without emotion, without reaction. On the last night, Haley prepared dinner in the room. She ordered his favorite dish, played the song from their wedding. Brandon walked in, looked at everything, and said, "You've always been good at setting these things up." During dinner, they talked about light topics. At the end, she approached and asked if he still felt anything. He thought for a few seconds and replied, "Last night, I closed my eyes because if I looked at you, I'd see his face. I tried. But there are images that stick. And that was it." She stayed quiet. That hurt more than any direct response. It was confirmation that he couldn't move forward. She cleared the dishes, blew out the candles, turned off the music. He went to take a shower. Haley stood in front of the mirror, looking at herself and realizing she had lost everything while trying to recover something that no longer existed. On the flight back, Haley looked out the window, holding back tears. She finally understood that no matter how hard she had tried, some wounds time cannot heal. And that some bonds, even with love, cannot withstand breaking. After the trip, everything became even colder. The attempt to rebuild only confirmed what was already clear: the bond between them no longer existed. Haley noticed that Brandon came home later, went out on weekends under the excuse of work events, and smiled more often outside the house than inside. She observed every change closely, trying to understand what was happening. Until one name started appearing frequently in his conversations with the kids: Nicole. First as a colleague. Then as someone fun. Someone who got his jokes, who liked the same shows, who knew how to listen. The way he talked about her was different. There was a sparkle in his eyes. Haley noticed it one afternoon when he told the kids that Nicole also had 2 dogs and that they had played in the park during a company event. This wasn't just casual conversation. It was closeness. The difference was in the small things: the way he smiled, the enthusiasm in his voice. At home, that sparkle hadn't been there for a long time. And Haley felt the pain of being replaced, even though Brandon hadn't said anything directly. It was a silent exclusion. One Sunday afternoon, he took the kids out for lunch and took a picture with them, which Nicole posted on social media. Haley saw it because a mutual friend tagged her. In the photo, he smiled in a way she hadn't seen since before the betrayal. The kids were happy, hugging, and Nicole appeared in the background, sort of on purpose, smiling too. Haley didn't say anything. But she felt everything. It crushed her subtly. She started locking herself in the bedroom more often. She avoided his usual hours. When he came home, she was already in bed. When she woke up, he had already left. That night, after putting the kids to bed, she came downstairs and found Brandon on his phone, laughing. When he noticed her presence, he put the phone away. She didn't ask anything. She went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, took a deep breath, and returned. She stood at the door for a few seconds before saying, in a low voice, almost a whisper, "You seem happier when you're away from me." He didn't respond. He just looked at her. She continued, "I still love you. But loving someone who doesn't love you back is a daily defeat." Brandon swallowed hard but stayed silent. She then added, "I don't want our kids to grow up in a home where love has become a memory. I want them to see you smiling. Even if that smile isn't with me anymore." That's when she asked for a divorce. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just informed him. And for the first time since the confession months ago, Brandon looked up and stared at her. After a few seconds, he said, "If that's how you feel, I understand." She just nodded and went upstairs. That night, she slept soundly for the first time in a long while. The following days were organized practically. They divided responsibilities, discussed legal details, informed their families. The kids were the only ones who immediately felt the impact. They asked if their dad was leaving. Haley explained carefully that things would change, but both would remain present. Brandon reinforced this as well. At no point was there an argument. It was as if, in that silence between them, there was an invisible agreement of maturity. Everything seemed to follow a predictable path until, a few weeks later, Haley felt unwell. Daily nausea, dizziness. She thought it was anxiety or the stress of the divorce but decided to get tested. When she got the results, she had confirmation, she was pregnant. The impact was immediate. Based on the timeline, the weeks matched the night they spent together in Hawaii. Her heart raced. She didn't know if this was punishment, a chance, or just another twist in a cycle that refused to end. She thought about keeping it a secret. She thought about leaving town. She thought about everything. But that wasn't the kind of woman she wanted to be. She set up a coffee meeting with Brandon and, when he arrived, handed him the envelope with the test results. He opened it, read it calmly, and stayed silent for a few minutes. Then he looked up and said, "It's mine, right?" She confirmed. And he just took a deep breath and replied, "We'll handle this together." For the first time in months, he held her hand. Not as a husband, but as a father. Haley didn't know what this meant in the long term. But she felt that, even apart, there was still respect. A care that endured, despite everything. The pregnancy progressed with regular checkups. Brandon remained present. He helped with the kids, took Haley to appointments, and followed the tests. There was no romance between them, but there was presence. When the baby was born, he was there. He cried when he saw him for the first time. Haley cried too. For different reasons. He cried for the son. She cried for everything that had been, for what they had tried to be, and for what they already knew would never be again. Their story came to an end without fights but full of marks. Brandon moved to a nearby apartment. He spent time with the kids, with the baby, and built a new routine. Haley continued with hers. She helped the kids with school, took care of the new baby, and gradually rediscovered her strength. The love between them turned into something else. It became care, respect, a permanent bond because of the children. But the marriage ended there. Without scandal, without complete forgiveness, without going back. Only after a long time did Haley understand that the greatest act of love she could still offer was to free Brandon from all of it. And that sometimes, when you love someone, the hardest thing isn't to fight. It's to let go. And allow each person to carry the scars they choose to bear.
Suspicious of your wife or daughter-in-law? Don't go through what we saw in the video. Check the link in the comments and get the ebook with valuable tips and investigator-approved sites to clear your doubts.
Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.